I find that investors in particular are sort of bored by geopolitics and find geopolitics to be unimportant. And I think on a short-term trading horizon, that's correct. But as your time frame gets longer, everything is geopolitics. Iran is not going to collapse. Iran is not going to become a U.S. protectorate. Iran is going to be its own thing. And Venezuela and Cuba, they will be part of this hemispheric doctrine that the United States is creating, and their choice is just, do they want to do it the hard way or the easy way?
Hi, I'm Ed D'Agostino from Malden Economics, and this week we turn our attention to the Middle East. While no one can tell you with certainty what the immediate outcome of this conflict will be, you can start to plan for the long-term effects if you have the right geopolitical framework. And that's what my friend Jacob Shapiro helps us with today here at Global Macro Update. Jacob, you are the number one person I've been wanting to speak with now for a couple of weeks. I don't want to try to even attempt to get ahead of the news cycle here because, it changes by the hour, and you watch the markets and it goes from green to red multiple times within a day. It's just the volatility is incredible. What I wanted to pick your geopolitical brain on is sort of the second and third order effects, the longer term ramifications for the Middle East and the globe that are going to come out of this U.S.-Israel coordinated action in Iran. What are some of the things that you thinking longer term are thinking about when it comes to this conflict?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be number one on the list. That's so nice.
Always.
And you're right about volatility. I feel like often we do a hat tip to volatility, but as I was telling cousin Marco on our podcast recently, I went to sleep Sunday night. Oil looked like it was going to break 120. Woke up, checked before I took the girls to daycare. We were hanging out around 100. By the time I was talking to one of my clients in the afternoon, we were sub 90, and we're recording Tuesday, March 10th at about 11 a.m. here in New Orleans time. And we're in the mid 80s. So, just sort of absolutely crazy. And it's not helped by the social media environment. So everything is getting pushed at every single second. It was funny to watch the, legacy media, Wall Street Journal still had that oil was up 20%, even as oil was crashing below 90. And then we also have a president in the White House who, all of these are things that he said in the last 24 hours. He said that the war was already won in many ways. The war is very complete, pretty much. We haven't won enough. We go forward more determined than ever to achieve ultimate victory. So people can be forgiven if it's confusing about what's happening one day, what's happening the next day. And I'm also reminded of something I think I said either the last time or two times ago that we were on here. I find that investors in particular are sort of bored by geopolitics and find geopolitics to be unimportant. And I think on a short-term trading horizon, that's correct. My geopolitical analysis is not going to help you figure out how to trade oil, for example, over the last 3 days. It's not going to tell you what you need to go out and buy and then sell next week as a result of the intelligence that we have on the next supreme leader, things like that. But as your time frame gets longer, everything is geopolitics. And I think this is a really good example of that. So these are not ideas that I'm taking quite to the bank yet, but I've had two real ideas, well, maybe three ideas that I've been wrestling with that I think come out of this. The first is that especially the Gulf countries have been trying to sell this image of a glittering modern future, of turning their back maybe on some of the backwardness of their nations and instead embracing technology and embracing clean energy. Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 is the best example of this, but there are plenty of others. Dubai emerging as a global financial capital where everybody wants to be, to steal from George Friedman, my mentor. It's like the bar in Star Wars. Everybody's there. Everybody wants to hang out there. Everybody's doing business there. It seems to me that future is not there anymore. And it's nothing that they did wrong. It's not their fault. I think policy has actually been moving in that direction. But how can you look at anyone with a straight face and say, with all of the chaos that is going on all the countries that border you, that it is a good idea to have physical capital or physical infrastructure in this part of the world? It's just not fundamentally a good idea. You've also got some of these countries have been expressing foreign policy preference. The UAE, aside from whatever is happening between the U.S. and Israel and Iran, has been on one side of the civil war in Sudan, seems to be on the side of, the Ethiopian government right now. You've got the Ethiopians mobilizing for maybe something against Eritrea. If you're going to be a financial capital like a Singapore or like a Switzerland, you also don't then have the luxury of offensive geopolitical priorities. You have to be the neutral party. And I think that some of these parties, at least it's obvious that it hasn't worked because Iran struck them. Iran didn't care about the implications of it. They saw them as a U.S. ally, as an Israeli ally, and a country that had to be hit in the context of that war. The second thing I would just sort of say here is, oil markets have been worried about the Strait of Hormuz for decades. It's been the nightmare scenario, and it's never really happened before like this. We've never seen a blockage that was this long, that was this sustained, and where uncertainty was this much a permanent feature. Now, in the late 80s, you had an incident where the Iranians blocked some of the shipping. It was called Operation Praying Mantis. The U.S. military ended that in a couple of days. Things were back to business. We've never seen this kind of extended shutdown. And so even if President Trump says the war is almost over, if it ends by the time you post this, first of all, you've still got all of the backlog and fixing all the shut-ins and all of the cinches in commodity supply chains that you have to deal with in the first place. But what's to say this doesn't happen again in 3 months? Or 6 months? What's to prevent a future Iranian government from understanding that all it takes, you don't need fancy rockets and nuclear weapons and everything else. You just have to make ship captains afraid to go through the Strait of Hormuz, and boom, you have leverage over the entire global economy. You've got a sort of Damocles over their head. Forget if it's even an Iranian government. What if this regime falls, but you have a ragtag group of militants who are hiding out in the mountains off the Strait of Hormuz saying, hey, we just need a couple rockets or a couple drones and we can do exactly what the Houthis did to Red Sea shipping. So I bring that up to say that if you're thinking from a very macro point of view, it doesn't make sense to have this much concentration of absolutely critical commodities to the global economy in such a narrow choke point. I cannot think of another choke point that is quite like this in the world. Even the Panama Canal, the Strait of Malacca, you have alternatives. There is no alternative to the Strait of Hormuz and the 20% of oil and the whatever percent of fertilizer and the whatever percent of LNG that's coming out of it. Like maybe you could play around with the Bosporus, but even then, like it's orders of magnitude smaller and you have alternatives. It was really costly to make the switches going forward, but now we live in a time of renewable energy and lowered cost of renewable energy. We live in a time of, increased interest in nuclear. Shale has opened up all sorts of new markets all over the place. If I'm advising, say, the Chinese government or the Japanese government, if you're a government that has wealth and you are currently dependent on the Middle East, why would you choose to be so 10 years from now? Is this not the inflection point that causes you to wake up and say, why am I doing this? Why have I concentrated such a huge portion of my economy on something that is apparently indefensible even from the U.S. Navy, the much vaunted U.S. Navy? So I think that is going to affect things in general. And then the last point I would just throw in here is, it's this continued acceleration of the multipolar world. I know that the Trump administration wants to make this look like America's powerful, America's back. I'm sorry, it's the opposite. When a hegemon like the United States has to resort to arraying this much military force, and by the way, it's still failed at keeping the sea lanes open, that's not a sign of strength, that's a sign of weakness. The United States was at its strongest when it didn't have to deploy military force to keep these things open, when everybody wanted to participate in the system because of American strength and American economic prosperity and everything else, and it's just not there. And it's one of the reasons I think that this particular excursion, to steal from President Trump's own words, doesn't make sense in the context of everything else that he's done so far this year, which actually does make sense. Recentering on the Western Hemisphere, rebuilding American influence in its own backyard, Monroe Doctrine, American power from Greenland to Argentina. Okay, like that is a strategy that you can at least sort of wrap your head around. Why the United States is, for yet another administration, wandering around the Middle East and, engaging in wars there is kind of confusing to me. So I went on for a little bit, but those are sort of the three larger macro questions that I'm wrestling with right now. And there are others to poke at in there, but that's where I'd start the conversation.
So lots of directions that we can go on that, but I just can't resist asking you sort of the why question, like why did we do this and why now? And I know nobody has an answer, right? But But everyone is a Monday morning quarterback. There've never been more experts on the Middle East and Iran there than this week. When you and I both know that those are few and far between, right? So the closer I've come to people in the military at a high level, or people in the government in the U.S., the more I've realized, like the more I know, the more I realize the less I know, right? like some of the reasons why things happen at this type of scale, the general population is probably never going to know the trigger. So I guess just as a thought exercise, do you have a sense as to why we did this? And why now? There's all kinds of theories out there. I'd be curious what you think.
I'll caveat what I'm about to say with by saying that why is a religious question. Science does not explain why things happen. It explains how things happen and what is happening and how the interactions are between things. That said, I'm not gonna decline to try and answer the question. I'm just gonna say, like, anytime we're getting into why, we're now leaving analysis and more about psychoanalysis or inference or some of these other things. I think the charitable interpretation is that the nuclear threat was real, and that this particular White House and its intelligence apparatus believes what Secretary of State Rubio said, which is these are a bunch of theocratic clerics. They're not rational. Nuclear weapons in the hands of this regime are unacceptable. And yes, the nuclear program was set back several years last year, but they were still pushing forward on nuclear weapons. They were pushing forward on a delivery system with their rockets and things like this. And this was just fundamentally unacceptable. It was unacceptable because what if a nuclear weapon makes its way into the hands of a militant group or a terrorist group? What does it mean for a nuclear-armed Iran to be able to threaten Israel or to threaten Saudi Arabia or to threaten the UAE? It's just not a threat that the United States can allow to happen. That's the charitable interpretation. I think the less charitable interpretation is to say this wasn't really about, in the same way that, Iraq 2.0, there was a nod to nuclear weapons, because anytime you invoke weapons of mass destruction, everybody has to sit up in their chair and say, ooh, if there's even a 1% chance of this is something that we really have to deal with. But I think this was maybe more about President Trump honestly feeling irrationally confident after the overwhelming success of the operation in Venezuela. He had just come off of getting rid of Maduro. It was about as clean an operation as you'll ever see. And I think maybe part of the thought process was, look, we can do this. There's no reason. I've been holding myself back this entire time because everybody told me that I couldn't do this, but I'm going to be the president who was brave enough to say, fine, let's get rid of these guys. Let's show them what the American military is all about. So it becomes more of a personal decision from a leader who thinks that he can do something and maybe is not that in tune with the constraints. And maybe there is some other reason out there. I mean, there was initial reporting that Saudi Arabia was actually pushing the United States and Israel to do this. I haven't been able to substantiate that reporting, but that was out there. Was there some kind of problem in the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, and were the Gulf states sort of realizing that Iran was not a country that they wanted to deal with? Was there a recognition of Iran's fundamental weakness coming out of the protests in January? And Iran has never been weaker, and the U.S. military wasn't ready to go in January, but now it's ready, and you want to try and take down this regime. You can start to go down those different rabbit holes. But I think it's somewhere between, hey, they're trying to get nuclear weapons, and we can actually prove it. It's not like Iraq. We have the receipts. And you've got a president who was feeling supremely confident about his ability to pull this off. And I will just say, it goes to show you that President Trump is not as unique as maybe people think that he is, because he's committed two of the exact same mistakes that his predecessors have committed. He is committing the Biden mistake in the sense that he's talking to the average American median voter. I'm sorry, not the average. That doesn't make sense. The median American voter, and saying, hey, don't worry about the inflation. Don't worry about higher energy prices. You're fine. The economy is great. It's better than it's ever been before. This is what Biden did in 2022. Okay, prices are up. It's base effect from 2020 COVID. You've never been better. The economy is doing well. Don't tell Americans that the economy is doing well when they don't feel like the economy is going well. And then the second mistake that he's making is this notion that just because you knock out a country's conventional forces, they can't resist you. Go back to the briefings that happened, Westmoreland during the Vietnam War. How many kills did we have? How many of their ships? They don't have a navy. We're obliterating them. All the ratios look good, and yet the Vietnamese still kept fighting, and they fought the United States to a stalemate, and the United States eventually had to walk away from it, not really having achieved its objective. So President Trump is right. You can destroy every ship and every single airplane, and American military power is awesome and lethal, and it's more dangerous than anything else that is out there in the world. But Mr. Trump, as long as oil is not moving through the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't matter how many ships you sink. It doesn't matter how amazingly powerful your military is. And Iran is not Venezuela. Iran is much more like Vietnam than it is Venezuela, which had a regime that was willing to give up on Maduro in the first place. So I think he really overestimated strength there. So there's an attempt to answer that question.
So what do you think about Iran's situation at this point and sort of the game theory of their strategy, right? Because my understanding is that they have a very pre-planned, decentralized strategy for what do we do if we are attacked, and that. Once that's out of the bottle, you're like, how do you put it back? I don't know how you deal with that.
Let me start with something I was extremely surprised about. I was extremely surprised that Iran announced Mojtaba Khamenei as the next supreme leader. That's the son of Ali Khamenei. And I'm extremely surprised because there was incredible pushback to the idea that the son was going to succeed the father, because that was part of the whole point of getting rid of the Shah. They wanted to get rid of hereditary monarchy. And according to all reports, Ali Khamenei was not for his son taking over. So the fact that they're elevating Mojtaba to that position, I found shocking. We also don't know where he is. There are reports that maybe he was gravely injured in one of the in either the Israeli or American attacks or things like that. But that was very strange to me, because there are definitely factions within Iran that are not going to be for that. And that was, to me, the first sign that maybe you're seeing some cracks in regime coherence. But by and large, we have not seen those cracks in regime coherence. By and large, to your point, in the weeks leading up to the war, Ali Khamenei himself, the now erstwhile supreme leader, reportedly picked 4 potential successors for himself and told every single senior Iranian official and commander to pick 4 potential successors for their position and to keep that a secret. And to your point, Iran does have this multi-layered system where if you lose contact with central command, you don't just stop what you're doing, you have authority to continue going. So you've maybe got regional commanders who are doing things based on the top-down strategy, but who are no longer in touch with whoever is calling the shots in Tehran until they can get a supreme leader and get some kind of leadership structure in place. So all of which is to say, at least so far, I still think that the Iranian regime has coherence. And I think, ironically, what's happening now over the last 36 to 48 hours is helping Iranian regime coherence in the short term. So, for instance, the White House put out a statement that questioned the territorial integrity of Iran going forward. Maybe some parts of Iran might be hived off. That's a red flag for all Iranians, even ones that hate the regime. The Israelis bombed, oil depots and things like that in Tehran, caused massive plumes of black smoke. There's acid rain. The WHO is talking about it. Lindsey Graham took to Twitter to say, maybe the Israelis went too far. If Lindsey Graham is telling you you've gone too far, you've really gone too far. All of which is to say, you've got this rally around the regime, even people who don't like it, rally around the regime effect happening, which will probably increase the strength of the regime. Now, that said, once the war stops, whether it's 2 days from now or 6 weeks from now, when the shooting is done, Iranians will all look at each other and say, who is accountable for this? Who is the reason that we got ourselves in this position? And maybe then the real internal infighting within Iran happens, and maybe you start to get a scenario of civil war or jockeying factions, or the kind of nightmare scenario where if you want to get shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz, there's no IRGC to call anymore. There's no central government to call anymore that is actually doing this. You've got folks that are not connected, but that's sort of getting ahead of our skis. But yes, Iran obviously had a strategy. The strategy has worked thus far, and this is a race against time. It's how long can the U.S. and Israel hit them with the level of rockets and ordnance that they're hitting them with, and how long can the Iranian regime stay coherent? And every day the regime stays coherent, the more the pressure goes back to the United States and Israel to declare some kind of mission accomplished and to get things going through the Strait of Hormuz again.
Can you talk a little bit about the IRGC? What is it? what's the significance within the regime, and sort of some of the hopes that I think the administration had that the IRGC might actually be their Delcy in terms of transition.
Yeah, if they thought the IRGC was their Delcy, they really kind of messed up. And also, they were looking for a Delcy, but then President Trump was also bragging in the White House that they killed all the leadership, that the people that they had on their list they killed anyway, which just goes to show you
maybe
kind
too
of how
effective.
Short-sighted some of these things are. Look, the IRGC is weird. There's not a whole lot of equivalence to it, and I've actually been reading my Iranian history lately to put myself to bed tonight. To put myself to bed at night. But so to understand the IRGC, we have to go back to the 79 revolution that deposes the Shah. And Khomeini, the original supreme leader, creates the Revolutionary Guard as a separate military force whose job is not to defend the Iranian homeland, that's the job of the conventional military forces, but rather to defend the revolution. And so the IRGC is not supposed to be engaged, for instance, in the economy. It's not supposed to be engaged in foreign policy. Its initial pure goal is to protect the revolution from those that would try and upend what changed in 1979. You go straight from the Iranian Revolution, however, into the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq War, which, hugely impacted both countries and is probably a war that we don't talk about enough in terms of the psyche of both Iraq and Iran. And so the IRGC immediately gets thrust into war, even though their initial purpose was to defend the revolution. After, Khomeini eventually passes on, you've got Khamenei, who comes in now as the second supreme leader. The role of the IRGC continues to expand, and it goes from this sort of weird amorphous protector of the revolution to a Praetorian Guard to a military force in and of its own right. And then you might remember Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was an Iranian president in the mid-2000s. And under his watch, he's trying to liberalize is the wrong word, but he's trying to jumpstart the Iranian economy. And ironically, the way that he does that is he privatizes parts of the Iranian economy, but that is to say it goes from Iranian state control to IRGC control. And at that point, the IRGC starts controlling, you have to estimate here because there's no clear way of knowing this, but the estimates I've seen say anywhere between 40 and 60% of the Iranian economy is run by the IRGC. So as we're here in 2026, you've got a formidable military force that has its tentacles in politics, that controls, let's say, 60% of the economy, and has a much more hardline agenda than the rest of the establishment has. Now, I think what the Trump administration was hoping was, okay, there's got to be some pragmatists there, because these guys are not crazy clerics and ayatollahs. They've been doing this now for 10, 15 years. They're obviously economically interested. Maybe they're more like the Egyptian military than they are the Praetorian Guard of the Shiite clerics. So if we can get rid of the supreme leader and the religious figure, and if we put the IRGC directly in charge and say, hey, here's an opportunity for you to enrich yourself by giving up this figurehead and actually doing what you're already doing in terms of the economy, maybe they'll play ball. Okay, that fundamentally misunderstands what the IRGC is, where they're coming from, what Shia Islam means, even to the corrupt kleptocrats who are at the top lining their pockets, what the figure of Ali Khamenei meant in general. It's just a complete misreading of the situation in the Middle East. And I can't be too critical of the Trump administration because every single president going back to Clinton has misread the Middle East and has not attached themselves to the finer points here. But yes, that's what the IRGC is, and I think that's why the Trump administration was hoping they had somebody to play ball with. It was never going to work. If somebody from the Trump administration had asked me whether they were going to get the IRGC to play ball with them with this plan that they concocted, I would have laughed in their face.
It worked well in Venezuela.
It worked well in Venezuela because Nicolas Maduro was basically the leader of a gang or a cartel. He was not the supreme leader of a religious movement and of the figurehead leader of an ancient and proud civilization going back thousands of years. And also, Maduro didn't have this kind of multi-layered organization that had its tentacles all throughout the Venezuelan state. Also remember, Maduro is not the OG ideologue in Venezuela. That was Hugo Chavez. Maduro was the thug who took over afterwards, and it was all just about enriching himself and
the
things
Steve
like that.
Ballmer of.
Yeah, you're taking. That's wow. Drive by at Steve Ballmer. It sucks to be him, but yes, the metaphor works. That's not Ali Khamenei. Ali Khamenei is many things. He's a objectively terrible person, responsible for the death and suffering of tens of thousands of people. He's not a sellout like Nicolas Maduro. This is a guy who knew the war was coming and decided to chill in his compound. He made it easy for the Israelis and the Americans. He said, I'm here with my family. I am ready for martyrdom. That's the guy that we're dealing with here. You're not dealing with the second or third order sort of person in the revolution. So it just also, the U.S. has a long history of influence in Venezuela. Venezuela is in the United States' backyard, and Venezuela is a very young state. When you read the Peloponnesian War, there's no appearance of Venezuela in the Peloponnesian War. Like the Persians go back to the ancient Greeks and to the ancient, they've been there for thousands of years. It's a very proud civilization going back. So it's just a completely different animal than what you were dealing with in Venezuela. And, it still could have worked if you had somebody on the inside who was willing to take control. What the United States had in Venezuela was they had Delcy. What it looks like in Cuba, what they're trying to do, they're trying to repeat the Venezuela playbook. Marco Rubio's been talking to the Castro grandson. There have been reports about that happening. So you can see they're trying to find the person that they can put in that place. They weren't talking to Mojtaba. They weren't talking to the next potential supreme leader. They don't have anybody who was willing to turn on the system because the system is too multi-layered and too complex at this point to do so. So there are many reasons why it's different, but that's a short list of them.
So let's talk about outside of Iran a little bit. You mentioned Cuba, and there's a lot of talk out there about Cuba's next. I hadn't heard that we're speaking with Castro's grandson. Coming from Rubio, of all people, that is just bizarre to me.
Rubio is nothing if not pragmatic. He's worn many different hats in his career and continues to wear more. But, if you're trying to be pragmatic, and Cuba is actually a really great analog to Venezuela because, again, the current president, nobody knows his name because he's not one of the original Castros. We're done with the original Castros. So if you can take somebody out and put in a figurehead who is willing to work with you, that makes sense. Also, understand that all of these conflicts that we're talking about, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, these are all leftovers from the Cold War. Like all of these, Korea, by the way, too, the Korean, what's happening on the Korean Peninsula is also, these are all leftovers from the Cold War. The animating ideological conflict that began U.S. problems with Cuba is gone. It's not there. And by the way, communism lost. Like capitalism was obviously better. Go to the streets of Havana and you will see how much better capitalism was than communism. Cuba is still existing like it's in the 1960s and 70s. So if you're the grandson of a revolutionary and you maybe get the chance to have a new relationship with an American administration that doesn't care about liberalism and democracy and good versus evil and communism versus capitalism anymore, but just wants to engage with you on this level, then yeah, you can sort of see how that person would come around and want to deal with the United States. But we'll see. We'll see if he's willing. We'll see if he actually can do it. There have also been reports that there's some big economic plan in the works and that the Trump administration maybe is going to cooperate with the current government, but they'll liberalize even as they still call themselves the Communist Party. Like it seems that they're looking for a lot of different avenues and pursuing different things. All the while, they've basically blocked fuel imports for Cuba right now. So prices are going up, unrest is increasing, power outages proliferating. They're raising the temperature there as much as they possibly can.
I was in Cuba a few years ago in Havana, and a lot of the old part of town, well, it's all pretty old, but like when you walk down the street, you literally are walking down the street because you shouldn't walk on the sidewalk because stones falling off of buildings regularly and you could get killed. Like I remember walking down the sidewalk and a local kind of motioned me over and pointed up. And I was like, wow, it's literally crumbling. So I, for the sake of the people that live there, and I think it's a beautiful culture and a beautiful island, I hope something changes, but I have a feeling that it's not going to be what it's kind of like what a lot of Iranians around the world were probably hoping for, that this is the end of the regime.
Maybe, but the counterpoint there is Caracas. You've got foreign journalists doing hits on the ground in Caracas for the first time in 20 years. You've got nightclubs and bars opening up. You've got anecdotal stories of porterhouse steaks on the menu and U.S. investors going around there. I mean, Doug Burgum was down there just this past week. You've got U.S. cabinet secretaries going down and touring Venezuela. So that, I think, is the positive use case where let's say you're a Castro grandson or somebody who's tied to the regime. You've seen what it looks like if you don't play ball. It means the helicopters come in and take you to a court in Brooklyn and you're sitting in a jail like Mr. Maduro. Most people are not going to want to do that. If the flip side of that is, I can keep my position, I just have to enrich myself and let the Americans invest here and let money flow in. Cool. That sounds like a pretty good bargain to me. That was never going to work in the Iranian context because the person you were dealing with was Ali Khamenei, and then the network underneath that was not like they're built on resistance. They're not built on sort of the same principles, which goes back to what I was saying. Like you asked why Iran? I don't know. It was so almost self-evident to me that it was not a good idea. In the same way that it was self-evident to me that Russia invading Ukraine was not a good idea, but Russia invaded Ukraine anyway, and the United States went after Iran anyway. So at a certain point, geopolitics stops being useful, and it's really about who's the leader calling the shots and how do you get into the psychology of their head and what are they doing. But this goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning. In the short term, geopolitics is not helpful. But in the long term, geopolitics tells you everything you need to know. Iran is not going to collapse. Iran is not going to become a U.S. protectorate. Iran is not going to become part of a U.S.-led network and be open to U.S. capital and everything else. Iran is going to be its own thing. And Venezuela and Cuba, they will be part of this hemispheric doctrine that the United States is creating. And their choice is just, do they want to do it the hard way or the easy way? It's a very different set of variables that they have to deal with.
Last topic I want to ask you about, Jacob, is China. Like, there's a lot of theories in the world of Twitter experts.
Always with China. So many theories.
One of the theories that I heard is that China's, quietly encouraging this action because it just weakens the United States, which puts them in a better position, right? Any thoughts on, does China even fit into this? I mean, it must at some level in a geopolitical puzzle perspective, but what are your thoughts on all the rumors that are going around?
Let me just dispel with the first ones. No, I don't think that China is going to invade Taiwan this year because U.S. military forces are held up. And no, I don't think China is coming to the aid of Iran to open up the strait or things like that. I think China has played the situation about as well as you can because they've been thinking long term and they haven't been taking the bait with the Trump administration. You might think back to last year when the Trump administration was doing their thing where it was, 100% tariffs, 150% tariffs, 250% tariffs. And the Chinese put out, I'm paraphrasing here, but they put out a terse statement that was like, we don't really understand what 250% tariffs are. Here's our tariff rate. Call us when you want to make a deal. We're open to a deal. Otherwise, we'll continue forward. And they slow played it, and it's been a back and forth between the two sides. And Trump is going to go meet with Xi Jinping, and I expect some kind of grand announcement of a deal. Now, I don't know that it's going to be worth the paper that it's printed on, but you're going to see some kind of deal there in general. Ditto this with China's energy situation. Yes, China is dependent on energy imports, but they've been, just look at a chart of how much renewable capacity they've installed lately, how many new nuclear reactors they're bringing online. They also, Russia functions effectively as their personal gas station now as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, so they've got alternatives there. They're in a much, and they also have built up their reserves for many months. They're in a much easier position than, say, India or Japan or South Korea are, which also depend on hydrocarbons that are coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I'm not saying that they like this from the point of view of commodity flows. This is going to be yet another bump in the road, and I'm not saying that everything is great for China. You had those purges recently that Xi Jinping underwent, and those were concerning for me. First, he purged the corrupt, then he was purging his enemies, now he's purging his friends. It's a pretty clear textbook when you have to start purging your friends and you're having to purge the People's Liberation Army, the thing that everybody says is going to go take over Taiwan. That's a sign that you're feeling pretty insecure. There's no succession plan that we know of. And there's also the real estate crisis, which they've been slowly deflating and getting their way out of, but it's still there. It hasn't gone away. It's to their credit they've been able to manage it, but it's not like it's gone. The Chinese economy is still sputtering a little bit from that point of view. And yet, all that said, they can deal with this okay. They're not going to come to Iran's aid. They're going to have their deal with President Trump. They didn't rush into a deal like some other countries because they understood that they had leverage, and so they keep on pushing on. Not, I think, to be some kind of global competitor to the United States, but to be a regional power and a unified power in the Asia Pacific region. I think that's what they're pushing for, and I think that's where they're going. So I just don't think there's a lot to tie between the two things. Now, President Trump made this connection himself yesterday, late last night. He tweeted about how, the United States was going to get oil going through the Strait of Hormuz again, and that it was a gift to Xi Jinping. I guess he's bringing gifts before the summit that's going to happen next month or something like that. And maybe there'll even be a role for the Chinese Navy to play in an international coalition to keep oil going through the Strait of Hormuz. By the way, I feel bad for the Iranians. The Iranians are the ones that get screwed in all of this. Imagine the Chinese and the French and the Americans and everybody else joining hands to make sure oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians are sitting there being like, this is what we've been afraid of for 150 years. People taking our resources and not caring what happens to us. I don't feel bad for the regime, but for the people, I feel a little bit sad. But yeah, as for China itself, I'm not saying everything is great with China. They have their fair share of problems. But when it comes to just this particular war, I don't think this means much for what China is going to do next. And if anything, I think China has played this just about as well as any of the countries could have played it that are dependent on exports that are coming out of the Strait of Hormuz.
Is the biggest winner out of all of this renewable energy or alternative forms of energy? That's
a great question. I think the biggest short-term winner is clearly Russia, because suddenly, their oil is a lot. Vladimir Putin was feeling himself yesterday. He was saying, if the Europeans want to work with us, we are still willing to trade energy with the Europeans. They just have to stop lecturing us about freedom and blah, blah, blah. So, and Russia's economy, the Russians can deal with more suffering than we can in the West, but the Russian central bank has been keeping it together with Scotch tape and bubble gum. It's been getting pretty dire. Suddenly they get a reprieve. They get at least a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks of higher oil prices. They get waivers so that some of these countries can go there. They're definitely the short-term winner there in general. As for renewable energy, I don't know. My thoughts about energy are that we're sort of in this transition period. It's not a perfect analogy, but I've been talking about the switch from coal to oil at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. And that we're in sort of a similar moment, except the shift is from hydrocarbons to TBD. It can be LNG, it can be geothermal, it can be nuclear, it can be solar and wind, it can be things that haven't even been invented yet, that we're sort of moving towards there and we don't know what it is. One of the things I do think that means is that we're moving away from everybody using a barrel of oil the same way. So for literally 100 years, the global economy was a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil, and it's fungible, and we're all competing for the same resource. And you can see that countries are starting to diversify. You can see that we're going to live in a world where, hey, the United States has a lot of hydrocarbons, so we'll be a hydrocarbon-based economy. China doesn't? Okay, so they're tripling down on renewables. They're going to have more of a renewable nuclear-based economy. The Europeans bet their energy future on Russia. Whoopsie daisies, you better figure out really fast what you're going to do because you're kind of screwed looking at the menu that you have in front of you. It's what makes a country like Chile, for me, from an investment perspective, look incredibly appetizing because they're like the Saudi Arabia of solar and wind, and they've got geothermal that they can build there. So if you're looking for cheap cost of energy far away from geopolitical conflict, Chile has the sort of makeup of a country that you would want, because I'm of the opinion that cheap energy and relative political stability will probably mean economic prosperity. But that said, not all countries, have the resources to do this necessarily. What China's doing with renewables, there's a reason that they're lapping everybody else. It's because they're willing to spend that kind of capex without certain return, because it's a state-planned authoritarian economy with a bunch of wealth. Not all countries can say that. So if you're Pakistan, or if you're Vietnam, some of these countries that have, Vietnam's an example of a country that's done well, Pakistan an example of a country that has not done well. You don't have the money to buy energy to keep the lights on for the next 6 months, let alone to say, hey, we're going to completely rejigger our economy to think about, not being dependent on oil anymore. So I think you're going to have these different pockets of the world. There will still be consumers of coal. There will still be consumers of oil. There will still be consumers of hydrocarbons going towards the end of the century. But then there will also be countries that want to opt out of that game. And if they can do it in a way that is cost effective, they'll have a really interesting advantage in front of them. So is it a victory for renewables? I don't know. It depends on the country. Is it a victory for renewables in China? Sure. They'll accelerate. Is it a victory for renewables in the United States? Probably not, because the United States has plenty of oil and natural gas. I would expect to see the U.S. limit energy exports before you see the Trump administration embrace renewables because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. So it goes back to this thing when you're thinking about geopolitics long term. The big change that we're talking about here is we're moving from oil to something else, depending on the geography that you're coming from. That's a huge change, and we haven't had a change like that since we went from coal to oil. I often tell myself, I hope that in the late 1800s, I would have been smart enough to look myself in the mirror and say, put it all on Standard Oil. Like go play some golf and just put it on, like roll with the ups and downs or whatever, but just put it on Standard Oil and go play golf or something like that. Like there are going to be opportunities like that in the energy economy going forward.
Are you getting tons of phone calls asking you to come and speak about this sort of thing? I mean, your phone must be ringing off the hook.
It's been ringing, honestly, off the hook since Russia invaded Ukraine, although I admit the velocity has increased in general. And I have I've done 4 events in the last, or I did 4 events leading up to the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran. And I actually struggled with each one of those events because I was thinking to myself, well, do I start off with Iran or do I start off with what I want to say about what's happening in the world from this really more high-level macro position? And each time I decided to go with that high-level macro point of view, because you can go read the headlines and you can get lost in the headlines. I think what's important is to try and give yourself some framework, some sense of where you're going, and then you have to slot in what we're seeing into that framework and give yourself tools to evaluate whether your framework is correct or whether your framework isn't correct. So even when my phone is running off the hook to talk about this particular thing, I always say yes, but then I also say, but I'm not going to spend the first 10 minutes talking about what's blowing up in the Middle East. I will get to it. I'm not going to ignore it, but I'm the person you bring in if you want to think soberly about what does this mean 10, 15 years out. If you want to talk about exploding things in the Middle East, it's like a cottage industry of folks who will speak to you about those things. So
it's about understanding, right? You know, like trying to build a framework to understand what is and is going to happen in the world. I think there's no more valuable use of geopolitics, and I think you're one of the best in the business at it. So jacobshapiro.com, people, go there and have Jacob come speak at your conference.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think it's tough for folks because just to sort of, the parting shot, for the last 30 years, it's been globalization and the unipolar moment, and that's gone. And now people need like the next framework. So I hope I can predict what is, but I'm very happy if I even just describe pretty well what's happening now.
Where we're at. So, yeah. Not easy.
No, not easy, but may we live in interesting times, right?
Be careful what you wish for. Jacob, I'm hoping we can do more together in the near future. So I would say viewers, stay tuned on that. We're cooking something up. Not sure what it looks like exactly yet, but I'm excited about the potential. Always appreciate your time, Jacob. Good to see you.
I look forward to much more, Ed. Talk to you soon.
So like I said, I'm hoping to do more with Jacob Shapiro in the coming months. I can't really say much more than that right now. So in the meantime, if you want to learn more about Jacob and his work, and I encourage you to do so, check out his website, jacobshapiro.com. While you're at it, be sure to subscribe to this channel and sign up for our free weekly letter and leave us a comment. You'll find links to all of these things in the description below. Thanks for watching.